On today's show, the Capitals template for success. How did they get it right? And how can other teams around the Metro Division learn from their success? Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Capitals template for success. How are they able to get it right? And how are other teams around the Metro getting it wrong? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about rebuilds that didn't work. I think I feel lucky as a Capitals fan and as someone that hosts the show for Locked On Capitals here, as I can talk about a team that did a rebuild the right way. But how have other teams messed that up? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about Metro teams slow to change. And I'm going to talk in particular here about the Pittsburgh Penguins, for example, a team that held on to that aging core for too long. And why is that? Well, because that core is what got that Penguins team a lot of success. How do they rebuild and get this team successful in a hurry? But just to get it going here, what the Capitals got right and what still needs work. And you take a look at it. It wasn't too long ago that when you talked about the Capitals, the biggest knock against them, the biggest negative thing you could say is they are one of the oldest teams roster-wise in the NHL. And, I think that some people felt like the Capitals got lucky winning a Stanley Cup in 2018. And, how come they can't do that again? If you take a look at the Capitals, they almost fell into the same pitfall that some of the other teams around the Metro, again, the Penguins, where they wanted to hold on to an older nucleus that got them success. I'm talking about Backstrom, Oshie, these kind of players. And there was some reluctance there to make change because why do that? That is a proven group that in the past has done some truly great things, but they tried to do that and they tried to do it and they just couldn't get over the hump. They could not regain that greatness that they had in 2018. And Peter Laviolette, he was the last coach of this team that I think that the mandate for him was not to integrate the youth, but to try to squeeze as much as you possibly can out of that Rock the Red era. And squeeze he did, but it just wasn't enough. So the Capitals, former GM Brian McClellan, noticed that it was the end of the road for that lineup. And you started to see changes. You saw Hathaway and Orlov go out to the Bruins and return. The Capitals got some draft picks, and you could kind of see the writing was on the wall. And some of that was planned, right? You saw Hathaway, which, at the end of the day, a great player. Orlov, beloved with the Capitals organization. But it was about making change. And then some of the change wasn't planned. And what am I talking about? Backstrom. Backstrom went into the season and he was going to give it another go, but it just wasn't working. He stepped away. Connor McMichael, kind of took on that role, or ostensibly that was going to be his role. As we know, he ended up on the second line left wing there. And then also TJ Oshie, Humpty Dumpty, that you couldn't put back together again, that his back, was so messed up after year. Kuznetsov moved out, that some of it was genius and some of it was just situations presenting themselves. to former GM Brian McClellan. And they made the move to go in a younger direction. And the biggest part of that success, of course, I think, is to bring in head coach Spencer Carberry, who has been an absolute game changer for this team. He understands the youth, he understands the older players, and how to make both of those younger and older players work together in harmony. And the thing you like about Spencer is he's not afraid of making changes. I think of the first loss to the regular season last season. And guess what? The next game, everything got all shook up. So that is, the big thing about the Capitals' success. So let's dive into that in segment one here. And the big thing, like I said, 2 seasons ago, if you had asked me if the Capitals would be in the playoff mix, I would have kind of laughed. But now with a younger core, a revamped blue line, and legit goaltending, this team is a real threat. And it's kind of wild, isn't it, how this team turned it around? And I didn't cover that off the top there, but net minding as well. That, GM Brian McClellan looked at Samsonov, looked at Vanacek, and's like, that's not working. I know that we were all in on it. And the belief was that, Samsonov was going to be the guy, and Vanacek, was going to be the guy. Inconsistency was the theme there. They could not find consistency between either one of them. So no qualifying offers, and the Capitals went in a different direction. Because you take a look at it, the front office now, what Brian McClellan started and Chris Patrick is now running with, it's a retool that actually worked. And what do I mean? You take a look at it. I mean, there's teams out there that are floundering, trying to get their rosters back together. Not the Capitals. Quietly, smartly, and maybe, just maybe, it's the model the rest of the Metro should have followed. And it's going to be a tough lesson. And I don't think the Penguins are out of it yet. I think that the 2 older players that are kind of, could go somewhere else. I'm talking Evgeny Malkin. I'm talking Sidney Crosby, that there's still is some reluctance to make big change. And I understand the Capitals aren't moving Ovechkin or anything like that. So I understand why they don't want to remove some of the pillars. But at some point, you got to make bold moves. You got to go out and make Las Vegas Golden Knights moves where you have no warm fuzzies associated with anyone on the roster. You just want the best players possible out on the ice. Now, so what did the Capitals do right? I think that, you take a look around the Metro and even kind of the NHL at large, it's an interesting case. How did the Capitals get it done right? For starters, they didn't go full-on teardown. There was talk about that. If you are an everydayer of this podcast for the last few years here, I spoke about that was a real possibility. They kept the core veterans like Ovi, Wilson, Carlson. And what did they do? They surrounded them with youth, speed, and upside. The Capitals know that ostensibly this is going to be the last season of Alex Ovechkin with the Capitals. It could be the last season for John Carlson. So they kept the pieces that were important. But I think a bigger part of the equation is they also added a lot of youth that is totally going to reshape this team in the future. They bet big on Connor McMichael. If you're an everydayer again, I talked about, a summer or so ago that it had to be the season for Connor McMichael, and it was. And also the Capitals willing to take chances again and again. You want to talk about Hendrix Lapierre, got that bridge deal. Last season, he was going to be the guy, third line center, didn't work out. And the Capitals, they sent him down to Hershey, knocked it out of the park. And guess what? Got that bridge deal, and he's going to have a chance to prove himself again. And it's all about the future guys as well. Some of them are on the team now. Some of them are a bit of a ways out. I'm talking Ryan Leonard, of course, that is going to be a game changer. And some people are like, game changer, Dan. Did you see him at the end of last season? He got that one empty netter, and listen, that was out of the frying pan into the fire. We're talking about NCAA to the playoffs. You'd be hard pressed to find any player that's going to just take like that to a fish to water. It wasn't the case, but a full season under the big lights, I think Leonard's going to take off. Ivan Miroshnichenko is going to get a kick at the can this season. Consistency is what's going to keep him on the big team and not getting sent down to Hershey. Andrew Crystal, circle, underline, bold font, I think is going to be the season for Andrew Crystal. Drink the Kool-Aid on Crystal. I think that he's going to do it, even though some people are saying that he'll start the season in Hershey. If I was the coach right now, put Connor third line center. I put Andrew Crystal, that second line left wing, and let it play. And I think they will. And I guess that, what we'll see in camp and preseason will determine the outcome there. And the most recent addition, of course, is Lyndon Lakovic, who was drafted here this summer here and is going to be a bit of a ways out. But the captain, Moose Jaw, game changer, leadership qualities, huge player, is going to be a part of not this next wave, but the wave after. Truly great players. And they went to work on a roster around the edges and the risky moves that former GM Brian McClellan talked about. Pierre-Luc Dubois was a leap of faith that many people around the NHL are like, what are you doing, Capitals? And I heard from a lot of different people, doing this show, what did the Capitals just do? Do you know that he signed an 8-year deal with the Kings? Guess what? Turned out to be a great move. Again, a bit invisible, if you will, in the playoffs, but so were some other players. But Pierre-Luc Dubois during the regular season was lightning in a bottle on that second line center. Connor McMichael's game grew around him, and Pierre-Luc Dubois, revitalized himself playing in DC. So that was a big thing, big reset that he found here. And Jakob Chychrun, the big swing, the big hit, the home run, Jakob Chychrun. The Capitals were all in on him for seasons, even before he went out to Ottawa and got rewarded with his great play with the Capitals, a lengthy extension, totally changed the blue line. Good defensively, good offensively, check. The future is good. Matt Roy, not as flashy, even though he put up some pretty good offensive numbers this past season, not necessarily his MO. And Anthony Beauvillier, the only player the Capitals acquired at the trade deadline, lights out. Even got some time playing in the postseason with Alex Ovechkin and Dylan Strome on the top line. And guess what? He's going to be a Capital here, sign an extension as well. All high upside moves without gutting the system. You don't have to do that. They fixed the net minding, right? They took on Charlie Lindgren, not this season, but relatively recently, an unknown for the most part. Got his start with the Canadiens, had a cup of coffee with the Blues, and all of a sudden, Charlie Lindgren is the guy in there. And it played rather well. Needs a little bit of work. What else did they do? They didn't go with the tandem of Charlie Lindgren and Hunter Shepard like Dan thought. That Brian McClellan looked at that and goes, that's not truly tested. I'm not so sure that's going to work. And what did he do? He brought in a familiar face in Logan Thompson, who we know was lights out for good swaths of the season, was in the talk of being a Vezina finalist. So totally, those are all the moves that the Capitals did that are truly groundbreaking. And what put him in this position here? They didn't have to gut it out. They didn't sell everyone, and they are reaping the benefits. So now this is a team that's younger, faster, deeper, and most importantly, cap flexible. They're not stuck like some other Metro teams that I'm going to talk about later in the show. That, he took big swings like, I'm going to go out there and get this big marquee name and he's going to fix the team. Not always the case. Build a supporting cast of good players. They don't always got to be the bright, shiny toy, the ostentatious, look at me. I think that is what the Capitals did really well. And we're talking about it here. They're not there yet. They're still a work in progress. This team is not perfect because retooling into a playoff team, that's one thing. Being a cup contender, that is a totally different animal altogether. Let's be real. The scoring still isn't where it needs to be. They took a swing at Ehlers. They're sniffing around at Roslovic. Ovi's still a threat, but the secondary finishing You take a look at how the Capitals got exposed against the Hurricanes, and the team that continues to knock it out of the park, the Florida Panthers. They are the complete package, right? That is the big thing, that is for sure. And talking about the power play, it wasn't scaring anyone, especially in the playoffs. And also, physicality is something that is there, but it's not there. Tom Wilson cannot be the lone deterrent, the only physical player, as he is evolving more into a goal scorer. He'll drop the mitts when needed, but I think he's trying to grow out of that. They got Dylan McIlrath on the team, right? But he's kind of depth on the blue line. He can drop the mitts and fight with the best of them. But I think they need more. That has kind of been their identity. Outside of Wilson, who's the guy pushing back against the Panthers and Hurricanes in a 7-game series? You need more. I think that is something, and they've done that. So look, the foundation is built. The Caps are on the right path. They're closer than the Penguins, farther along than the Flyers or Jackets, and way more stable than the Islanders, even though I think they're going to be a team to take step forwards. But to end this Metro Cup drought, they need to go out and get the top 6 scorer. Is that going to happen this season? They might have it internally, right? The further we get, towards the start of the season, more question marks. I talked about yesterday about the sniffing around on Roslovic. Is he going to be the game changer, and is he even better than internal options? They need another playoff style grinder, someone who crashes the crease and creates chaos. You don't win in May and June without those guys. Just ask Florida. And, if there's a do-over, you got to think that the Capitals were thinking to themselves, we should have done more at the trade deadline. Look at the Panthers. Look at them. Who the heck do they think they are? Brad Marchand and all these players. Guess what? Won them another cup. They know what they're doing. Florida went from virtually obscurity a handful of years ago. They panned around the arena. It was empty seats galore. Now everyone is a Panthers fan in Florida. Even bigger than the Lightning, if you can believe it. Look at how the Lightning have accomplished. So I think the Capitals have done a lot of great things. I think a lot of teams around the Metro could learn more, but there is still more that they have to do. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Metro teams slow to change. I'll discuss straight ahead. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast, and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. And sometimes it's last minute. I want to go to the game. I got a bunch of time. Are they available? Well, good news, Dan. There are tickets available, and they're actually cheaper. Plus, you have panoramic views of what your seat is going to look like. There is a lot to love. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So segment 2 here, we're talking Metro teams that were slow to change. And you take a look at it, again, the Penguins jump out, but they are not the only ones that, you take a look at what they accomplished. Why would we want to trade these players when they bring us so much success? Again, the teams that do it very well have zero attachments to their players. They want the best players on the team that are going to give them the best chance at winning the game. So let's talk about that in segment 2. There is still a lot to get into in this episode. Thank you so much for sticking with me here. So talking about segment 2, the Metro tried to keep the past alive and it backfired. So like I talked about in segment 1, the Capitals retooled the right way. Let's talk about the rest of the division, because this drought, 7 years, no cup final appearances from any Metro team. And it didn't happen by accident. Some of these teams, they just couldn't let it go. Again, the Penguins, not to diminish what they've accomplished, because they've accomplished a lot. They were dominant, back-to-back, Cup 16, 17. No one will ever take that away from them. But they refused to rebuild. And guess what? A lot of changes, coaching change, GM change, a long history of truly greatness in the Steel City. Yes, I'm a Capitals fan, but you can't deny what they've done. They kept the core together way too long. Crosby, Malkin, Letang, legends for sure, but they're in their mid-30s now. And now you're trying to make changes that, we're the last person at the dance and we didn't look for a partner. And what are we going to do? It's tough. We're looking for life jackets on the Titanic when everyone has one. It's not a good position for the Penguins to be in. And, they made some moves, right? But are they enough? And they tried to make a big swing, like to just put a stamp. And this is what I'm talking about. I don't want Chris Patrick to fall into this. I don't want him to make a big move for big move's sake. Talking the Carlson trade, Carlson on the Penguins, that is a desperation move. It flopped, and now they're finally tearing it down, but they're late to the party. And that team has their work cut out. And I don't think they're going to be better next season, but they're still going to be a far cry from being in the hunt. The Islanders, same thing, even though you take a look, first overall pick in the draft, if they're not just super excited on the island, I don't know if they ever will be, but I still think they need a lot to do. They still got to wash a lot of that Lou Lamoriello out of their hair that just won't go away. And that the new GM, you still got Patrick Waugh there that's still, who he is, a little intense, shall we say, that this could be a team that takes steps forward. But again, a team that was a little slow to the punch. I think it has a little bit to do with Lou Lamoriello and just his interesting nature. After those 2020 and 2021 playoff runs, they could have refreshed the roster, but nope. Lou Lamoriello doubled down again and again in his curmudgeonly old fashion. Fired coaches, blamed the systems, and now the team's collapsed. They made some bigger moves at the free agency. Again, they made some big moves at the draft, but I still think they're a ways out. Their window's closed, and they've got no young core ready to take over right now. Right now. I think that they made some moves. I think that the moves at the draft will be good in a year or two to come, but I still think they're kind of caught in the mushy middle of the pack of the Metro this season. Again, they made some moves that I think will make them better than they were last season, but I still think that they're not moves that are going to make them a real threat. That is my take on it anyway. And you take a look at the Flyers. They were a team in the 2019-2020 season, then fell off. But instead of rebuilding, they hired John Tortorella. Now, I love Torts. I love him, in spite of who he is, that he is who he is, and he's not afraid of telling you what he thinks of you. He's not afraid of telling, the referees, his fellow coaches, what they think of him. And sometimes, that he isolates himself, and, he's a bit of a polarizing character. So they took a gamble on a younger Flyers team to try to get them in the right position. And I think that Torts got him at least a little bit in the right direction, but now they made a change. But again, another team that's, I think, going to be kind of caught in the mushy middle. Tried to tough it out, and for what? Just spinning their wheels until finally embraced the rebuild last season. And still, it's a work in progress. Again, the Flyers, another team that I think will take a step forward this next season. I mean, I'm not going to say that they are going to be, fighting for the top spot. I didn't say that. But you take a look at how the Capitals didn't have that reluctance to make changes. That, some of them, like I said, were planned, some of them were unplanned. But the one thing the Capitals had was their eyes set to the future. So the big question is the Metro. Let's just, kind of push the Capitals to the side for a moment. What happened to the Metro division at large? The big thing is they tried to stay relevant when they needed to restart. And, like I talked about, Hathaway, Orlov, and then you take a look at Backstrom and TJ Oshie and Kuznetsov, that things changed in a hurry. Some planned, some things weren't planned. But, if you're a longtime Capitals fan, you remember before those changes that there was a talk about the Capitals facing a tear down to the studs rebuild. But when you take a look around the Metro, they held on to the veterans too long, sacrificed futures for short-term fixes, and now they're paying for it. Some teams are finally getting it right, but man, it took too long. I feel lucky that the Capitals made the moves that they did make. It's still going to be a dogfight. I still think they need to make some bigger moves to stay competitive. I think the Capitals will be good. Will they take steps forward? Will they take steps back? It'll be determined on what kind of moves that happen between now and puck drop to start the season. It'll be an interesting story to follow. That much I know for certain. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about rebuilds that didn't hit and what comes next. Straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment here, we're talking about rebuilds that didn't work. And I don't want to be the guy that's na-na-na-boo-boo to the rest of the Metro, but the Capitals did it good. There's still some work to be done. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an immaculate rebuild. It was kind of a retool, semantics at the end of the day. But there are some teams that swing and a miss with their changes, right? That it wasn't all gravy for them. So let's talk about some rebuilds that didn't work. And, the Rangers come to mind. That they had some luck there, but talk about a riches to rags story from the top to the bottom. And what kind of moves can we expect? Let's talk about that in the final segment here. Not every Metro team ran from the rebuild. Some learned from it, but didn't hit it bullseye. Do I think the Capitals hit it bullseye? Pretty close, not dead center. Take the Devils. They nailed their draft picks, Hughes, Hischier, Bratt, all high skill, high upside guys. And that offense, it can fly. There is no doubt. But the playoffs, totally different story. Physicality ramps up, space disappears, and those regular season darlings vanish. And in some questionable moves like the Toffoli trade and injury problems, and you've got a team that's good, but not great. And, the Devils are a team. Seems like every year that they're going to be a team. Look out for the Devils. They're going to be a really good team. And, we've seen some good things for them, but sustainability and, trying to win it all is something that has eluded them. The Rangers, similar deal. They had high picks in Kakko and Lafreniere, but never found the true franchise forward. And then you take a look at it. Panarin signed, they fast-tracked their window, went out and got Trocheck, traded for Kane, but the core aging fast, and they still didn't have solved the depth problem. They've hit on the East final twice, but couldn't finish. And, the Rangers, here recently, you've seen glimpses of greatness. And even last season, there were moments last season that I thought they looked pretty good. But, another team that, kind of floundered, and then, Laviolette on there just, was, I think, lost the locker room to a certain extent, that is why changes needed to be made. Now, you look at Columbus, for example. I'm going to talk about Columbus as a team that exceeded many people's expectations. Dean Evison pushing the buttons, pulling the strings, got a whole lot out of that team, at least more than many people had expected. Many seasons it's team tank for Columbus, but not the case last season. They tried for everything, though, traded for stars, hired and fired coaches, draft well at times, but poor development and bad timing left them stuck near the bottom. Again, there were moments that they took steps forward, but also moments that they could use a little bit more work. That said, with Don Waddell now in charge, maybe they can turn the corner. So what's now? Honestly, it's the Capitals, Canes, and Devils that look most ready right now. Carolina added Keandre Miller and Ehlers. Jersey bulked up with Dadonov and Connor Brown. Those are some moves. You take a look at the Hurricanes. They gave the Capitals fits, and adding Keandre Miller and Ehlers to the mix is just going to make them that much better. You take a look at Rantanen, who was there for a hot minute and thought that was going to be revolutionize hockey with the Hurricanes because that team lacks star power. Still knocks it out of the park consistently. But in the next 2 to 3 years, keep an eye on the Flyers, Jackets, and even the Islanders, as the Islanders, like I said, they knocked it out of the park at the draft, as far as I'm concerned, and made some pretty solid acquisitions during free agency. If they finally commit to the youth, if one of them lands the top pick in the 2026 draft, that changes everything. Think Bedard, think Macklin Celebrini, these kind of guys that, I think that right now you take a look at Bedard, for example, he's kind of surrounded by a poor cast, and the Sharks with Celebrini, I think, are going to be better. They've made some pretty good additions there. It'll be interesting to see. But for now, the drought continues. The Panthers rule the East, and it's up to someone in the Metro. Maybe it's going to be the Caps. I mean, I don't want to count them out to change that narrative. Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Capitals, or of course on YouTube, and answer the question: are the Capitals good to go as is, leaning into the youth, which I've said I'm comfortable with? Chris Patrick said he's comfortable with, but are you feeling confident going into next season that it's enough? Do they need to go out and get that bigger upper echelon player? Of course, you think that Ehlers would have made this team markedly better. It just didn't work. And I'm not 100% sold that Roslovic is going to be the guy to change everything for the Capitals. Again, I stick to the script here for Dan, that I think that this is the year to push the chips in on the youth. And if it doesn't work, then, Chris Patrick is going to have to be busy on his phone looking to plug some holes or call some different guys up from Hershey. Because if it's not this season, when? Are you going to keep bringing in these veteran players like Roslovic to kind of block the progress of, younger players that are maybe do that spot? I think that this is the season to do it. And it's not, too risky. Again, they still have Wilson, Ovechkin, Carlson. There is still a really great supporting cast around. It's not the Buffalo Sabres on the ice that's, almost exclusively young. That I think this is the season to push the chips in on Leonard, on Crystal, on Miro, on whoever else is ready to take this team to the next level. If not now, when? All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.